and welcome to Legally Speaking with me, Tarun Nangia. In the past few days, in the newspapers, in gossip columns, the news that we read was Rishi Sunak may be, in a sense, contender for the Prime Minister's position of United Kingdom. And a question in my mind came that people of Indian descent, or a lot of Indians in various fields, have made their mark in UK. It's whether it be in the field of business, whether it be in politics, whether it be in the field of medicine. You see Indians, in a sense, having achieved eminent positions in United Kingdom. A recent phenomena, if I may say so, is in the field of law. We've had many people who have chosen to fly down from India and go to UK and practice law there. Many more have become door tenants. Case in point, as today, the latest one to have become a senior associate at Fort Pumpkund is Justice Arjun Kumar Sikri. He has become an associate member at Fort Pump Court in UK. This happened 2 days ago. So you see many people are, in a sense, choosing to go to United Kingdom. And that is why we will discuss that whether the Indian diaspora has come into its own, even in the legal fraternity. And is that day not far when we have a lot more Indian lawyers in UK, a lot more lawyers preferring to settle there also? To discuss this very important issue, I have with me an eminent panel. May I welcome Senior Advocate Parag Tripathi. He served as the Additional Solicitor General of India, who joins me. I have also Senior Advocate Gaurav Banerjee, who joins me for the first time on this kind of a panel. If I may introduce him, he is the son of an illustrious father who, in a sense, was also a son of an illustrious father. His grandfather was an ICS officer, was awarded the Order of the British Empire, was a finance secretary of Bengal in the British rule era. Afterwards, he also served as a civil servant in what was then independent India, and also served as the governor of Haryana. And his father, Milan Kumar Banerjee, as we all know, served as the Attorney General of India. And he himself has served as the Additional Solicitor General. He is also very well known as an arbitrator. Welcome, Mr. Banerjee, to Legally Speaking. Mr. Ryan Karanjawala is a familiar face on the show. He's the managing partner of India's leading litigation law firm, the Karanjawala and Company. Welcome once again on Legally Speaking. Now, to lay the ground of what this issue is and how do we, in a sense, are seeing this, may I request Mr. Karanjawala from the solicitor's end to explain that why this trend, which we see in the past few years?
So, Tarun, the first thing to remember is when we talk of the Indian diaspora, in numerical terms, there are more people in the Indian diaspora spread mostly towards the Emirates, Saudi Arabia, and the US. But when we really speak of the Indian diaspora, meaning an impactful diaspora, then we speak of England. And the first thing to remember is that the whole scenario has changed so drastically since when lawyers first started practicing in England and today, that it's a complete sea change. I remember, I think, one of the first and the earliest people to sort of put his flag in the city of London as an Indian practicing law, and I have a firm of his own, was Harishs Journey. And Sarosh has often told me, while reminiscing over the old days, that it was a rough journey, and it was a tough task, because at that time the Indian diaspora really didn't mean much. We are now talking of the late 60s, early 70s, where a lot of Indians, a lot of families had migrated. There was, in 69, there had been this fear of communism coming to West Bengal and the Naxalite movement and so on. So a lot of families migrated. But what did they do once they migrated? So some people took up jobs in the lower echelons at different companies. Other people put money together and started small mom and pop stores and, the Kirana store, so to speak, and so on. And they were all eking out a living. And the Indian diaspora in those days would largely consist of people in different positions, sometimes in the bank, sometimes in the insurance industry, sometimes in the financial world. But all of them never had really reached a position of strength or a position of sort of impact. Today, if you look at the Indian diaspora, you see something totally different. When you look at the rich list of people, I was just glancing over it the other day, and I found that in the 20 richest Indians, two people are known to me. One is Gopi Hinduja, who's a friend, and Lakshmi Mittur, who's both a friend and a client. Also, there's Anil Agarwal, who I don't know personally so well, but he's someone one is acquainted with. In addition to that, now we have a situation where Mukesh Ambani may have got a little bit of a foothold by buying Stoke House and a sort of residence for himself and his family in London. So we have another Indian billionaire who may have 1 foot outside the country. Then the rumor is that Cyrus Poonawalla is also sort of thinking, there's constant talk and rumor in the market. Cyrus Poonawalla is also sort of thinking and shifting and keeping 1 foot abroad. I mean, Cyrus was always a summer in London person, but it was a sort of a holiday situation. Now it's looking slightly different. So what you see today, and forget the most important thing of all, my other client, the Tatas, they are in England, England's largest private employer, because they bought Chorus and they bought Jaguar Land Rover. As a result of that, after having bought both of those, they have suddenly become the company that provides the largest amount of employment in England in the private sector. Now, when you have a situation like this, then you can see that the Indian diaspora has completely changed. And this is what has prompted people, I feel, apart from the fact that they obviously like going there, people like at the top of our profession, Harish Salve, Gopal Subramaniam, to go and sort of virtually become NRIs, spend 6 months and now more than 6 months in the year abroad, eke out for themselves a practice which is substantially a practice which is outside the shores of India. And the only reason they can do it is because today, if you have the Indian diaspora backing you, then you really have the cream work. Because I just enumerated the companies that these people own. Apart from that, the other day someone was telling me, if you look at a situation where you look at the commercial causes court of the London commercial causes, you will find that in almost 50% of them, at least on one side or the other, there'll be a non-English company. Now, those are the avenues that are today available to Indians who go and practice in order to get for themselves a good practice. And that is one of the reasons why today the Indian diaspora is being tapped by a lot of Indian lawyers. You yourself gave an example of Justice Sikri. Obviously, he's not going to be able to practice law because as a retired Supreme Court judge, he cannot. But he will be advising, he will be playing a role. And we're very fortunate also that we have with us Gaurav, who is, as he will explain to you, a law tenant. And Gaurav, of course, has had a long history with England. He studied there and so on. So he will take you through the whole process as to what prompts people to go there, what are the advantages and opportunities that you have there. You're on mute, Tarun.
Point well taken. And when I come to Mr. Banerjee, I will want to ask him that because 3 generations of his family studied in London, his grandfather, father, and himself. I wonder why he came back here to practice is what I'll ask him. I'll go to Senior Advocate Parag Tripathi. He himself went to Harvard for his education and then chose back to come to Delhi and practice. What brought you back here? Did you plan to stay back when you went there? And what do you make of this new trend of senior Indian lawyers also migrating and practicing there?
The decision to come back to India or stay over is a very personal decision. So it has personal parameters which one looks into. And it's really a personal decision. But I agree with Ryan that the opportunities which were there, say in 1960s, 70s, 80s, or 90s, were of a different level than those which are there now. Coming to your second issue, which is what is it that makes some of our top lawyers go and settle in England? I think that's a very interesting area because ultimately one has to look at the nature of change. It's a change of ecosystem. So one change can be that there are many people who go as students and stay over. Now, they never get into the Indian judicial or justice delivery ecosystem at all. They just get transplanted into a foreign ecosystem. Then there are some who get in at the halfway stage. There's an example of Talat Ansari, who was involved in Union Carbide, and he went after putting in more than 15, 16 years in India because he was so competent that he was picked up by the American law firm. Then there are
Union Carbide.
Union Carbide, yes. And then comes the example of Mr. Salve and Mr. Subramaniam, which you give, which are people who have reached the pinnacle of the profession here and then move on. Now, I'm sure in their cases also, a large part of the reason would be personal. But that's not something we are going to discuss in the show. Therefore, there is also the professional aspect. Now, what can this professional aspect be? The professional aspect is, one is the desire perhaps for new challenges, new if I may use the expression, the new ecosystem where you want to make your mark again. It's a desire to excel. So that can be one part, the newer challenges which you face. The other is the lifestyle issues, because the work-life balance in England is very different from work-life balance in India. The lifestyle, or if I may use the expression QOL, quality of life, is different. According to many people, far superior. According to others, not so, but definitely different. It's a different lifestyle, starting from the quality of the air you breathe. You remember there was that famous quip of an English law lord when they were trying to free a slave who was docked in the wharf in a ship, saying he was asked, what is the law by which you can set it free? So he said, the air of England is too pure for a slave to breathe. It's another thing he was set in free and then sent back to slavery elsewhere. But that's not the point. So the point is that this is a complex set of issues. But again, when you settle in England or go to England after reaching a level of excellence in India, there are three ways perhaps in which you can do your practice or professional life, and maybe you do all of them. One is to focus entirely in English law and English courts. That is, live a life purely as a QC in England. That's one way of doing it. It's not necessary to do that. The other is to have a mix of both, the best of both worlds. Do your English commercial law practice, do your international arbitrations of a level which perhaps one can't do here, and also do Indian law and Indian courts. And there, I think, presently, with this new system of video conferencing and video way of court appearances, it is a facilitator. And maybe that's the way it will work in the future. Why not? That's the way it should be. So that wherever you're placed, you can participate equally in Indian courts, in arbitrations, and elsewhere. So this is a very complex and an interesting area where there are so many things which go into that equation, which helps a person decide that would he like to move on and try something new in the same lifetime.
Now, there are two elements to this question. A, they wanting to go to UK, and secondly, there being a lot of work in UK for them, which, as Mr. Karanjawala pointed out, he attributes to the fact that Indians have become like one of the biggest employers, and a lot of Indian businessmen, even second generation, doing very well in every kind of, be it the food business, be it the liquor business. There are many businesses where Indians are actually, in the sense, at the top heap. Now, I have a different question to ask Mr. Banerjee. Now, 3 generations of your family studied in London, as I said, your grandfather, your father, and you. And when you see this trend that, okay, you came back and you are working here, and now people who spend a lifetime in India are choosing to go to UK. What do you make of this? And what do you feel when you see that, okay, these guys who you never thought, they were fixtures in the Delhi top circuit of lawyers, and they suddenly migrate? What do you make of this trend?
So thank you, Tarun, for inviting me onto your show. And let me pick up from what Ryan has mentioned and what Parag has mentioned. 2 or 3 points. One is the situation today obviously is very different from the 80s or the 90s. Secondly, as Parag says, it's a very personal decision as to what you want to do. And, really the question is to understand And therefore, I should put it in a more personal manner as to how this has worked so far I'm concerned. You mentioned my family, etc. Yes, it is true that 3 generations of us were at Cambridge. My mother was also there. My brother was also there. But that's history. Let's go back a little in time and you can judge the situation then. So I graduated from Cambridge in 1989. I studied for the bar, became a barrister in 1990. I had my 24 dinners and I was ready to practice in England. And the fact of the matter was that in 1990, there was a glass ceiling. And I was perhaps the only non-white barrister who was a pupil in any of the top commercial sets. And I was offered a place, which I thought I should not take, because in fact, in 1990, the opportunities in India were much better. I mean, that was the reality, or that's what I thought. So now fast track to another 10, 15 years or 20 years down the line, the situation is very different. So to explain now what the difference is, if you study the system in England, you have barristers who have barristers' chambers, you have solicitors who have law firms. Typically, barristers, usually, traditionally, Old Boys Club, Oxbridge, etc. Law firms, much more dynamic, much more, business oriented. But times change. So if you look at the barristers' chambers, just as in India, there are 5 top commercial sets in London called the Magic Circle. Essex Court Chambers, which is my set, which is an arbitration set. 1 Essex, Brick Court, Fountain Court, and Blackstone. These are by and large known as the top 5 commercial sets. Obviously, now the work there has changed. A lot of the work has some sort of Indian connection. Particularly international arbitration, my set, Essex Court Chambers, has a lot of international arbitration. I had friends there who were friends from university. I had friends who were, I was into arbitration in a big way even before all this. And in 2014, I saw that Harishs had joined Blackstone. In fact, the story there is we were on opposing sides of an arbitration, which is the SR arbitration. He was for SR, I was for United India. He was being briefed by Blackstone. He joined Blackstone. I was being briefed by people from Essex Court Chambers and other sets, and ultimately I joined Essex. That's how it happened. So obviously the work there is quite exciting, and I think another point that Parag makes, it depends on at the level at which you get it. There are people from India now getting at really the basic level who are becoming barristers just now, and they're getting places in some of these sets. Somebody I know quite well joined Brick Court Chambers recently. Chintan Chandrachud joined Brick Court Chambers. Then people come in at a reasonably senior level. For instance, I came in after I was ASG and I was already a senior advocate. Then there are people joining who are retired judges. They want to be arbitrators. So obviously the work is there and each has an individual reason to join. So that's where we are at present.
May I ask you a follow-up question? When you became a member at the Essex Chambers or a door tenant, so to say, do you see yourself going and working there more and more, or is it something that you just did? I mean, there is no application of mind there in that sense.
So there was some application of mind, not a great deal, but there was some application of mind. I was never interested in shifting. I think shifting lock, stock and barrel, then you should not be a door tenant. Then like Harishs or some of the others, then you should be a full-fledged member of Chambers and, you have your clerk and you have your setup there. But since I was doing a lot of arbitration and Essex Court Chambers gave me that opportunity, door tenant is a halfway house. You're an overseas associate, you're a member of the Chambers, but you're not a full-fledged member in the sense that you don't pay the full chamber fee. You get all the facilities, you don't get a room. I don't need a room. I mean, I go there, used to go there 3 or 4 times a year. You do your arbitration. It's a collegiate sort of situation. You meet a lot of interesting people, very senior people, who I was in college with are now QCs, juniors who have just joined. So it's a fun place to be. So there was there was some thought that I'll join it because it was an arbitration set, but it was never the intention to fully shift lock, stock and barrel. But that's a personal decision. As Parag mentioned, it depends on the individual.
Point well taken. I'll go to Mr. Karanjawala. When I was interviewing Mr. Saroj Zaiwala for his biographical interview many years ago, he told me that when he landed in London, it was English country, very difficult to break in. And the attitudes of Englishmen were different. They are largely much changed now, is what he told me over the years. You run a very successful law firm, and you may be understanding how difficult it is to generate business. So for the fact that these lawyers have taken that bold step of migrating at the peak of their careers, I mean, both Mr. Salve and the others who have gone were at the peak of their careers doing good practice, and then they chose to go. Does it mean that the landscape in United Kingdom has now totally changed and it is ready to welcome more Indians? And Indians are naturally adapted to the English language also. That is also not an issue. Addiction is all right. I mean, communication as such is not an issue with Indians, but the issue of acceptability, which was an issue maybe even 2 decades ago, is history now. Do you think that time has come, or are we pontificating too much on a few people going?
So you're absolutely right that when Saroj went there, he was basically an Indian in what was known as a white man's territory. And obviously, therefore, as he himself has said, and he must have told you in his interview, it was a bit of a rough ride for him. It was a tough journey, as he put it to me. And the reason is that in those days, there were very few. See, normally what happens is that you get supported by people from your own community who have more faith in you than people from an outside community. And these are things which are fairly normal. I mean, there used to be always this feeling, even in the Bombay bar in the old days, that the Gujaratis would brief the Gujaratis more and the Parsis would brief the Parsis more. And since there were many more successful Parsi solicitors, therefore there were many more successful Parsi counsel. This is always a feeling that people have. And there's no way you can get out of it because this is human nature. So Saroj went, to put it mildly, too early. And it must also be remembered that Saroj didn't go from here to London. I think he studied in London, joined Gagrat & Company, which had a branch office there, and then sort of took over and started on his own. So that's how it happened with Saroj, and obviously it was very difficult. Today, when Harishs and all went, of course, Harishs, you must remember, didn't go today. I think Harishs went about at least 10 years ago.
2012-13 when our arbitration was on.
Correct. So he went about exactly 10 years ago. And Harishs also tested the water. Being a shrewd man, he tested the water, and he always had a fallback, which is that he could always, if he found that, and this is before he would have become an NRI, if he found that, things are not so, he has a slightly lean patch, all he had to do was to come back to Delhi for those few days and more than financially make up for any lean patch that he would have had over there, and so on and so forth. Then came getting into arbitrations. So you get into international arbitrations, but you're doing it for an Indian client. So then instead of the Indian client conferring with you in India and then taking you all the way down for the arbitration, what happens is you remain there. The Indian clients come with their solicitors, brief you, you get briefed, and then you conduct the arbitration there. So Harishs has been a slightly slower and more incremental sort of testing of the waters. I think Gopal, and here Gaurav will have to tell us because he's familiar with the scene. I think Gopal took a sort of a virtually sort of a one-day lock, stock and barrel kind of decision far more than Salve did. I think Gopal sort of uprooted himself more sort of, hurriedly or more quickly or more decisively than Salve had. But these are the two people at the very top. But today, it speaks volumes for what they have achieved, that the biggest fight in India, which is going on at the moment, which is, I think Gaurav is on one of the sides, I think Parag is on the other. So, which is Future versus Amazon, or what they call Ambani versus Amazon. one counsel is leading one side and the other counsel is leading the other.
That's an interesting point to note. One more interesting point to note is that two people, very seniors, Gopal Subramanian and Harish Salve, both came from the chambers of Soli Sorabji. Both were juniors there, I think, 30 years ago. So that is one more point. But we will bring this part one of our show about Indian lawyers choosing to practice in United Kingdom to a close. In part two, we will discuss where are they headed. Are we going to see them occupying eminent positions and the like? But that is on part two. Thank you, viewers, for joining us. And thank you so much, my panelists, for sparing time and joining me in part one of the show. Waiting for you to join us on the part two of this show. Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.